Good afternoon, everyone. This is Anto Budiarjo, and this is Monday Live. Our mission is to help us get through the pandemic and also trying to figure out what's on the other side of COVID for commercial buildings. The profiles for panelists are on mondaylive.org, where you all registered. Just a reminder that the views expressed here are of those of the individuals, not necessarily of any organization or company. Please do post questions and comments on the Zoom Q&A and chat. And if you'd be so kind to complete the survey at the end, we would appreciate it. So as always, we're going to go through a number of slides. We just from the members of this group, providing some links of news and interesting things. So the agenda for today is that once I go through the slides, we'll talk about sort of big picture, what's going on, and then the main part of the show today is really talking about the business model, the SaaS business model that we started discussing yesterday, and welcome your comments and input then. So this is a slide from Ken talking about the July edition, which is going to be online presumably tomorrow, being the 1st of July, talking about enlightenment and Renaissance. Sounds interesting. Steve Fay continues to talk about what he's doing with his risk assessment sort of initiatives. John, few links here. The word Legionnaires is sort of starting to come up again, so we may talk about that. And there's this sort of strange word, servitization. It's a mouthful that we'll be talking about, no doubt, today. Therese, I'm not sure that she's on the call yet, but this is her perspective this week. Jim Butler's talking about virus-proofing offices and schools struggling to reopen. A few interesting links there. Roger, this is from a couple of weeks ago, so this is still relevant, I'm sure. Tracy, who does quite a lot of work in the restaurant industry, is sort of seeing challenges still there. So that's interesting. Mark Peacock talking about lawsuits and waivers, and also about skyscrapers and specifically Hudson Yards. Anno talking about this wonderful word again, servitization. Need to practice saying that.
You need to get more American into it. Servitization, I think it is.
Servitization. Okay, thank you for the hint. Alper talking about what's going on in Seattle as a RFP there. And that's the end of the slides. And just a reminder, if you want to see these slides, because there's some interesting links you want to follow, go to mondaylive.org and you'll see the slide deck there for you to click away on. So with that sort of news and trends and things that's going on, anybody want to jump in and start? Anything you guys are observing out there?
Yes, I didn't update the slide. I could kick in something here in the UK. The news this week is that Intu, who are a big property owner of retail, has gone into administration. Their assets about 10.5 billion. So they've had to call in the administration. They were in kind of a little bit of trouble before because their product portfolio is mainly retail, but it goes back to some of the things we've talked about in the past of whether it's the weakest to be in already sort of found out, and because they were solely retail, they've now collapsed. You know, they employ a lot of people. They own all the biggest. They've got an awful lot of shopping malls around the UK. So it's the first real major casualty in our, you know, from the real estate industry, really.
Wow.
So they collapsed altogether, or did they file, I don't know what the equivalent is in England, but a protection bankruptcy, or are they just done and out of business?
Yeah, no, they're done. They're done. It's administration. They've called in KPMG. They were losing dropped. I think the valuation dropped by about 22%, so about 2.25 billion drop in valuation, and they made a loss of over $1 billion last year, so they're just have collapsed.
So administration is somewhat equivalent to Chapter 11, I believe. So the assets will be
Yep.
sold and whatever's that whole thing.
There's some that have had some value. They've got about 17 major malls around the country. There's probably only a few they're going to be able to sell, I think. Not a cheery note to get off on, but it is interesting that there is a casualty there.
Well,
Roger,
that's-
how much was online retail affecting their business in general?
An awful lot. So retail is now up to something like 32%, 33% of sales in the last month. So that's killing all the obviously all the retail stores there, and they haven't transformed any of the malls yet. So
Right.
I think that that's a clear issue, and I think COVID and the lack of being able to shop and everything just about put the knife in to finish them off. As I say, they were already in trouble before, and it's whether it's just what was going to happen anyway or not, I don't know. But certainly this has finally killed them off.
Mm-hmm.
Has the group noticed a slowdown in momentum because of the resurgence, a slowdown in momentum of offices starting to open back up as a result of increased visibility now and more cases here in the U.S., in the States?
Well, certainly in the restaurant space where everyone's getting nervous again because states are starting to reverse some of their opening progress. So now Congress is looking at a bill specifically targeted to restaurants to try to save that. I suspect, which I kind of had all along, that if this were to be sustained throughout the year, which there's no reason to believe it won't be, that the restaurant industry is going to struggle to make it through. A lot of, especially the independents that just, there's kind of different waves. There's those who don't have drive-throughs that are going to be a problem. But anyone with just, dining in, that's going to be an issue for them to make it through this, even with aid, I think.
It was interesting to see, moving slightly off of the restaurant stuff, the travel industry saying that inside the US, the planes or the travel is, the quote was almost back to normal. I'm not sure I believe that, but it's actually picked up a lot. But the international travel is definitely nowhere to be seen. Yeah.
I didn't get anything about the US. I haven't seen anything about the US being that good. I think they said it was something like up in the 60% of what it used to be. And they follow that by saying, and even a 10% reduction puts a lot of people underwater. So
yeah, I think if you were down 90%,
down.
if you're down 90%, 60% of what it was is pretty good.
Yeah, I think you got the app. I don't know whether you can see it, but you can see all the flights in in the US in the air at any one time. Then you look at Europe, the difference is significant. There's a lot more in the US.
And I noticed, my question to the panel, to the group, I noticed that the Commonwealth of Virginia, where Steve, John, and I live, the governor now, even though we're supposed to go into phase 3 of this reconnection or whatever, that now he's talking about something to the commercial office buildings. So again, that's kind of what led to my question to the panel is, are we going to start seeing a slowdown now of reoccupying our offices? I believe we are. So
Certainly here, Mark, we're seeing most people are talking about not going back this year now. They're just, they're just taking a handful of people back in, maybe even rotating a little, but there's no kind of passion or from both sides, both from staff and management, to actually get anyone, people back before before the end of the year.
So anything directly on in terms of our industry, in terms of the business levels, any sort of input on that side of things that anybody's seeing in terms of sales and orders?
Things have been, nominal, I would say, nominal to positive. The read we get is there are some people being affected negatively and other people being pushed to do more. Too many different data points to really draw a line through it. So we still look at things cautiously, but things have been good. So it's really hard to figure out. And some of this is, one of them, I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, there was a project that had been in discussion forever, 2 years, and they finally got the go ahead because they want to have remote ability to understand their facilities, right? It's new business in a way, but, does that mean the next one is going to get started down that type of a path? I don't know. Too unclear.
Yeah, we're doing fairly well so far this year too, quite well actually, but it's all based on business that we already had or things that were already kind of queued up, and some of our business not necessarily related directly to commercial buildings. Linked to manufacturing, by the way, but not commercial buildings.
And of course, we're now in July. In July and August is summer, so I'm not quite sure. I mean, that things normally slow down in summer. I don't know what that impact is going to be.
Well, just, here in the States, this is the time when our K through 12 business starts to rock. In the past, used to, kind of take off and stuff, obviously, as the kids are not in school. And I'm just curious, if we're going to completely see a slowdown in that part of the sector, or will we kind of just see they're still puttering along, or what will actually happen to that sector?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're starting to see schools announce their plans. And I know in our school district, they're going to give students an option. They've come up with an online option, and they can either go kind of back to their regular classrooms with all the changes and adjustments, but the city has partnered with an online school and will provide an online option for the students this year.
We've got a couple of guests today, Patrick Davis and Rick Ralston. I'll put them on the screen there. Do you guys see anything sort of in terms of the big trends and sort of things that's going on while going through COVID?
Yeah, I've seen K through 12. My wife actually is an accountant for a fairly large school district, and she just got her job, went over from one district to another and started with them, did all the interviews online, has been to the office 3 times in the district, is Round Rock ISD, and they're likely not going to open up all their schools. They're going to have a reduced set in the fall. A friend of mine's director of the maintenance for them running the ALC system, and he says they're not approving any contracts, they're not upgrading any systems, they're not doing any software updates, because it's a giant question mark as to how they're going to repopulate these schools, and they just don't have any answers at this point.
Yeah, and on our side, we're seeing the post-secondary levels, many of them saying, hey, we don't know whether we're going back. And here in British Columbia, we did actually have students back in the classroom in June, and but they're still really wondering what will happen in September, because it's going to likely be some sort of a hybrid. The thing that really came up and is evident is, hey, you have a whole bunch of different students than you had last year. It was one thing to shift from the classroom to online when you know the kids, but it's very different when you have students that you don't know, and how can you connect with them. So yeah, it will be very interesting to see.
Yeah. Part of school funding is tied directly to attendance. And so the state subsidies and the state funding that they usually got based on attendance, they don't even know how to account for that now. So that's going to be a real big deal as well. And the fiscal year for almost all school districts in the country ends in August. So we're just a couple months away from them having to go through and figure out how the hell do you even budget this thing?
Interesting. So what's Therese? What's going on in Silicon Valley? Because that's always another sort of different angle to all of this.
Yeah, I mean, report from not much since last week. My daughter did go back to University of California. There's some classes and there's some more protection, I guess, in terms of plexiglass when you go visit counselors and TAs. But they have this hybrid going, and I'm certainly, as a parent, getting letters, send your money to the UC system. So, they want the money to keep that balance alive. So that's the education part. I think California State and UC California parents came to the conclusion they're both saying the same things, but they said it in a different way. Both said we're going to do a hybrid, but Cal State said we're closed in the fall, but we're going to do a hybrid. And the UC system, Berkeley, UC Santa Barbara, et cetera, said they're going to do a hybrid system and they're open. So it was a little bit of a confused message.
Okay.
In terms of, the people in Silicon Valley are all happy to stay home and do their knowledge work from home.
Okay.
That's still true.
So any other sort of news items or things before we move on to the main topic?
I just thought it was interesting. There's legal rumblings out there. I pulled that one on the slide about, they mentioned Legionnaire's disease, but the point was potential shift in attitude that, we're all in this together in March. You open a building in July and you might be legally liable. Whereas, I sense a different attitude by seeing a little bit more of that in the news. Not sure, but it feels that way.
John, what are the insurance companies looking for, as you noted in your slide?
I'm sorry to have to go back and read it to answer that question. Read it again. So
It for the most part, I saw the same thing that John is referring to. It is to make sure that Legionnaire's disease, it's been tested and that it's not there, and all the precautions have been taken to get the water back up and so forth and so on. And in order to maintain insurance, they're asking building owners and operators to prove that they did do that.
Okay, let us move on. The main topic is what we started to discuss last week at length, which is kind of a move to SaaS kind of recurring model. We've been talking sort of in sort of planning calls in the last few days. And a lot of the conversations, as well as last Monday, was about the sort of the barriers towards SaaS models and recurring revenue. And one of the mechanisms that we kind of thought may be helpful to think about this is to kind of think about the concept of a business stack, trying to sort of separate the different types of things that we're actually dealing with, because there's a lot of confusion very easily. We can get into a sort of an easy confusion sort of situation with CapEx and OpEx kind of discussions. So the group went and looked for stacks, business model stacks. These are some of the stacks that the members here sort of came up with. I think the issue here is that most of these are very sort of technical or technology centric or product sort of offering kind of centric. And it's, I think what we talked about is really trying to think about this from the end customer perspective. So there was another stack that we've been sort of discussing, which is this one. I actually started this, which is kind of taking a sort of a bigger picture view of the physical stuff that goes into buildings, the control and automation, the data that needs to be dealt with, some kind of marketplace or some kind of mechanism to make sure the data gets used by some kind of analysis and management systems, which is what a lot of us do. And then getting to delivering the service to the people and the companies that operate buildings, right? So this is one sort of a potential stack. But the purpose of just showing this is just to kind of just frame the discussion about how do we organize, or how do we structure the thinking about potentially going to a service model for building automation systems. So I'm going to bring back the sort of the video of everybody and start the conversation. Does anybody want to start on this?
Well, I wasn't part of the original conversation because unfortunately I couldn't make it last week, but I have a question. I mean, it kind of lends itself, because there is any part of any SaaS model, there is an upfront cost. And does that tend to lend itself towards the larger companies who could perhaps afford to bankroll the original bit to have it spread over 3 years or something, as opposed to smaller companies who would need some sort of payment for some of the core costs for anything that they were doing? I mean, obviously software companies are slightly different, but if you're talking about an installation of any sort that actually has costs for those bits down the bottom, which are CapEx, if it's just providing services from the data, that's different. But to get to that point where you're exporting the data, you're doing some work on site, and that needs funding one way or the other. So it's either a split model where there is the customer pays some upfront money and then has a recurring sort of costs, or that someone actually funds it and then actually spreads that or amortizes it over the years. Did that get discussed at all?
Yes, it does. And that's kind of one of the things that kind of triggered this sort of layers and thinking about it in sort of different levels, right? Because the stuff at the bottom of the last stack that I showed are basically assets, they're CapEx stuff. Yep. And the stuff at the top, above that, is really not, or typically not. And I think one of the sort of issues that we discussed is that it's very easy to confuse the two. And yep. Think about everything as if they were controls and systems, in which case we get into almost sort of PC mentality. And that's very different to how SaaS models work in the sort of elsewhere in the world, in the universe.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the confusion between the CapEx, you're seeing some blended offerings, kind of like the mClouds of the world, where they feel like they can install hardware at a facility, but then call it a SaaS and then just charge a fee, kind of like a cable box. From real estate law, they actually can't do that. It's actually not legal to install a fixture of real estate, and you have to either have a fair market value lease with a buyout at the end of the term, or you have to CapEx it. But it's still going to count as a capital expense to the real estate. It becomes real property value. You cannot pull it away. A cable box you can pull out. A control system you can't. You can go at every mall. It's in the contract for every major retail provider. Whatever goes in and is wired into that real estate and operating pieces of the real estate is a fixture of the real estate. So if you separate the two, it becomes much more clear, and you realize where your opportunity for a SaaS is. And that's like John Petsy's team, where he's utilizing existing installed CapExes to deliver software as a service. But the dilemma on the SaaS is in the simple numbers. We had an example where Honeywell went into Fifth Third Bank and presented the Honeywell platform, Maximo and Watson. And then they finished a 2-hour-long presentation and turned to the facilities director of Fifth Third and said, what do you think? How many people do you think are going to use this? He said, so you need to know how many seats. And they said, yeah, you've got 1,000 banks. How many people in your banking institution would use this? He said 7, and maybe 5 super users. And so they kind of walked out with their head down, because that's what a SaaS requires. In most cases, a pure SaaS requires a significant amount of the business being delivered through an application in which a significant headcount is going to benefit from it and actually log into it every day and use it. So a Salesforce.com and SAP. Our problem in real estate is the business is using SaaSes now, but the real estate that houses the business never has that many people associated with it. That's why these things of automation are so good, because they don't have enough people to really functionally run the systems, so they have to automate, but then that is negative to a SaaS.
I guess it's because it's not part of their day-to-day business, Patrick. You know, the other part is the first bit you're saying that, you know, they could have hundreds of salesmen, thousands or whatever, but this is, you know, for a facilities management, just somewhere where they live to actually do their work. It's not core business.
Yeah, if you look at the personnel per square footage, and there's statistics out there we can all look at. I've got some I can send y'all from the government, but there is, out of all the tradesmen associated with real estate, there's one tradesman, one maintenance person or tradesman per 44,000 square foot of real estate. That means at 7,300,000 square foot of real estate, you got 125 people that are operating that across all trades. Of that, only 25 of them are in HVAC.
Yep.
Of that, only 5 of them get access to the UI. So
so that's the traditional IT SaaS model. It's all based on users.
Yes.
Right. Why does a SaaS model related to buildings have to be modeled that way? There are different economic units at play here.
It doesn't have to be modeled that way. It has to be sold that it'll be sold per building. Okay. But when IT comes in and infects the whole process in an uninvited way, which they always do, they're going to say, okay, when we had 100 buildings, it was okay. When we had 200 buildings, I tolerated it. But now we're at 500 buildings, and I'll be darned if somebody's going to spend that kind of money. How many end users do we have on this? They're going to say, well, we got 7 people using this. And they're going to divide the 7 times the 500 monthly fees, and they're going to turn around and come up with a very complicated way of saying no. We want to buy the software.
Rick, I know that you've had quite a bit of success with sort of system sales and recurring revenue. Do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been an interesting journey for us, and you know, we do have in certain applications per user charges. We have per building subscriptions, and we're thinking more and more in terms of points per point subscription, because you know we're not just looking at HVAC or electricians, or you know, we have cleaners, we have you know, building automation system integrators, all different types and applications, and yeah, it is a challenge, but the thing that I think is really interesting is, you know, we're moving more and more towards digitizing the entire service chain. And as Patrick said, you know, there's 125 service people in that portfolio, but it is probably, you know, 20 or 30 different service providers, different companies that are providing those services to that portfolio. And so how do we have a, I think it has to be, you know, move beyond SaaS. I mean, it's a software as a service, but it's a platform or the supply chain, digital supply chain is digitized, and you know, that really starts to bring in some interesting, you know, if within this group, for example, you know, one of this group is providing cybersecurity, someone else is providing energy analytics, somebody else is providing you know, building automation implementations, and all are looking at how do we provide these services as a service, and add, you know, each different player is adding value to that, and you know, from where I'm really looking right now is how do we account for all of that? How do we account for automation, automated services, the lock encryption device as a service, or the chilled water as a service, or having physical cleaners go in and clean the offices as a service, and account for it all and bring it together. So, you know, I think that there is a way, and we're going towards that. But it is, you know, obviously a big change. So that's my.
So is one of the as we have this discussion, looking at this as, and I think Anto, you mentioned it, should we not be looking at this as a software as a service, but instead get rid of the word software, but as a service model, which is then based on a set of deliverables and KPIs that are gleaned from that. And one could be a complete, let's just call it a smart building as a solution for everything that you can think of. And then to your point, Rick, there are tiers of services, cyber, analytics, commissioning, whatever they are. And again, they are based on a set of defined and agreed upon deliverables, KPIs, SLA, and so forth and so on.
I think, Mark, from what you were saying, that you know, really the services, the SaaS part, which is easier to implement, is those services that can be provided on data. So, you know, you're saying analytics, could be space management, you know, it could be a whole bunch of things that are provided, energy management, cyber stuff, you know, it could be off the data that you're getting from the data, rather than actually being beyond that, which is the install or on site. So the SaaS model is easier when it's software only. And I think that's the difference we're talking about here in the split in the stack, which is why my first question was, how do you fund that bottom bit below? Because a lot of it that doesn't live off the data will probably need some form of installation or product that goes with it. And so calling it SaaS doesn't quite work.
Well, and as soon as you add hours of labor into a service, then you have this problem with, hey, we're going to provide a platform that makes things more efficient, which means that the labor hopefully will go down. And so, you know, in a sense, that service provider, whether it's a systems integrator or an HVAC service provider or even a cleaner, is faced with, oh, now I'm cutting my own invoice amount every month by adopting this technology, and so how can we help those people exchange or monetize the efficiency gains that they're providing to their end customer, and you know, I think that's the other sort of I think there is a way to do that through a as a service model where the value add is a combination of on-site expertise and knowledge services. And
does it sort of come down to, we kind of talked about it a little, about a few minutes back, the units of what it is that we're selling. Right now we're selling, traditionally we're selling controllers and labor and stuff like that, but with the as a service kind of stack, we could be, rather than charging by users, which is really difficult as per Patrick's comments, because there aren't that many users, charging it by points or by device or by amounts of data consumed or sort of other sort of metrics that actually makes it much more sense, because then those units can be tied to success or sort of value. It could also be things like tickets, a travel ticket. You know, you could actually charge an amount of, I think Patrick, I think you were telling me you do that.
But the fewer travel tickets, the more value you're providing. So,
Right. Yeah, but I think
Contrary.
the point is that under the model of full service agreements, which have been around for decades, you know, it was kind of a bet. It was a bet that the company estimating the agreement knew that there was a lot of money on the table, and the company buying the agreement thought that they would spend more if they didn't have the agreement. So they did the agreement, and it really incentivized the service provider to underperform because they could get away with it because they controlled all the data. So I think coupling something with the data systems that we have available now that can have a digital scorecard on the results of a master service agreement, that has to be an end-to-end strategy, because anytime somebody gives over to a master service agreement, which I think is the direction it's going to go, and a master service agreement, my definition is real simple: a spend that you're doing in a random, uncontrolled way being regulated and normalized across a 12-month cycle. So you take something you're spending money on, services that you're already spending, but you have no budgetary controls, you have no predictability, and you have no constraints on what you spend per month, and you're annualizing that because this is data you already have, and you're literally going to the master service provider and you're saying, hey, I want to develop a recurring revenue agreement with you, so you get your recurring revenue, and I get my normalized costs that I can predict and go forward, and then I'm going to have enough data connected to it to know if we've right-sized this thing in such a way that we're moving the needle on the efficiencies and the utilization of the platforms that are scorecarding it. That's the model I think that's going to shake out of all of this.
So
Yeah.
Steve, I was going to ask you, because you're starting basically a SaaS business with Totem, right? So you're in a way trying to escape any kind of old ways of thinking. How have you thought about the sort of the pricing of the units?
Well, we do it one of two ways. We do it either by control system or by building So if the building owner is more inclined to buy on a per building basis, because it doesn't matter how many control systems they're doing, and that gives them the flexibility if they do 1 or 10. But a contractor, when we're selling to a systems integrator, they're typically putting in 1 control system. So they don't want to pay the building price. They want to pay the per control system price. So it depends whether you're selling top down or bottom up. So that's how we're doing it from that perspective. But we have a couple services now where we're combining hardware with software. So hardware meaning like a network device, or a network device specifically, and now you've got to amortize the cost of that hardware along with the cost of the labor to perform the service. Fortunately, we're not talking big dollars here in terms of the hardware cost, so it's not a big issue. But one of the advantages to at least the hardware that I'm talking about is you can under sort of an evergreen concept for hardware, where you not only take care of repairs, replacements, but you also upgrade the hardware when it no longer is available or the next new model comes out. That's really the concept of an evergreen. So it fits more into that IT psychology, which says, hey, my laptop that I'm looking at sitting at right here, I'm thinking of that as a 3-year, maybe 4-year life on it. And then I want the next one. I want the bigger memory, the faster, the better graphics, all the the nice stuff. Well, that fits nicely into at least what we're proposing, is that you get that evergreen thinking around that portion of the hardware. Now, can you do that with everything else that everybody on this call is doing? Well, no, it's a lot harder to do that. But at least at the level that we're looking at, we see it as a real possibility.
So, Jim, you're focused on cybersecurity, and I believe you have a pretty significant sort of SaaS thinking in your future strategy. Do you want to explain how you're thinking about that?
Sure. I think that I've listened very carefully to the conversation over the last number of minutes. And in our analytics business, we've been fighting this fight for the last 20 years. We started with SaaS models before SaaS existed as a term. And we finally discovered that what we were selling were services. And so the SaaS concept overall, I think, is a tough one to make play in building automation with building automation customers. And one of the problems you have is that the people are not sophisticated enough to understand the conversation we're having right now, especially when you are forced in larger institutions to bring in procurement people who have no idea what we're talking about, and quickly generate a race to the bottom procurement methodology, which drives the margins and the value out of the business immediately. So in our security business, our bet is that we are, once again, trying to attain escape velocity from the janitorial closet and sell to IT decision makers. And we think that selling IT security will be better received as a SaaS business, but with the traditional buildings customers, that's a challenge.
Jim, with that question for you, is that, the first part you're talking about, the traditional route, is really the construction phase. Really, servitization and everything else is once it's occupied. So it's different. You're talking about a different bunch of customers because it's an occupier or someone who owns the building who's involved with the whole life cycle and period of the building, whereas the tradition of it, as you were talking about, the mechanical contractor or whatever else, is just purely there for the construction phase, which is where BAS, controls traditionally have focused, all the system integrators and everyone else. And really, this whole model is geared around once the building's occupied, because there's no data, there's no information, there's nothing until the building's occupied anyway.
Yeah, Roger, you're hitting on, I think, the whole reason we need to be here in this forum, which is that the entire premise that a building is a capital asset that will last 30 to 100 years, where everything in that asset has to be contemplated in advance, simply doesn't scale for the dynamic world that we live in. If you were to try to spec the security technology for your building for the next 30 years,
good luck.
How much laughter do you think you'd receive in the IT world,
Yep,
where things are changing at a 6-month frequency? Yet everyone still expects buildings to put that capital up front in advance. Just think of the building you built 100 years ago. Can we really not synchronize those two time constants together, where we have to have an ability to have more dynamism, and that's a question of accounting and capital and money and procurement, and the entire model cannot continue to be driven off of 30 to 100 year capital investments that don't change, when there's certainly things change much more frequently than that now.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Anto, we've been delivering a SaaS model for 20 years, and it's priced very differently depending on the vertical. Primarily, I'm selling into service providers, and they're paying on a per work order basis. And we're starting to use the data to enhance that delivery and providing to our requesters a dynamic NTE on their work orders that they assign out to a service provider. So based on all of the data that we've collected, we know that this type of break fix work order should take this many minutes to repair, and typically it costs this much. And the NTE, or the not to exceed associated with that work order ticket, is then dynamically changed up or down based on the data that we've collected over 20 years.
Yeah, that's the exact model that we're doing. So what he did was he tapped into an already existing stream of transactions, and he melted his SaaS into the invoice. And that's the same thing we're doing, is we're taking service tickets and we're becoming a part of a service ticket. So our recurring revenue is the fact that the transactions will never stop. They may get better, it may get skinnier, but that's how you scale your business and deliver value, but they're never going to stop. So we're saying, okay, well, what are they already writing checks every month for? They're writing checks for services and for maintenance. So if your SaaS model can be tied to that transaction that already is streaming, and you just can melt into that ticket, but you can guarantee that you're going to add more value in that ticket than without that model, then you become this instant payback that's easy to digest, that's already, and when SaaS's glow in the dark is when you're adding an expense per month that they never had seen before, they don't understand it, it glows in the dark on their finances. But when you become a part of a transaction, I think that's where the real opportunity is, a way to exploit the existing transactions it takes to operate real estate and do it in a much more digital and efficient manner.
So in that, maybe Patrick or Scott, that's kind of towards the top of the stack, right? Delivering the service, and in the stack that I showed earlier, that's kind of the service delivery and the analysis. Would it make sense to, because there's a lot of data at the bottom, right? From the control systems and also data that's accumulated in the building. Is there a model where data is paid for on a per use basis? Because that's kind of, Steve, you were kind of alluding to that the other day, that if there was a mechanism whereby you can extract data when you need it and then put value in it, and maybe even pay for it to actually improve your service, does that make sense, or is that just silly?
Makes total sense, Anto, and we're actually doing that now. We have a business intelligence platform that we launched beginning of the year. It's a flat fee at this particular point in time, but two aspects. You can either report on and use your own data, or you can look at across the nation and benchmark the data, and obviously there's a premium for that, but we're already selling those data points to our customers.
Is that data from multiple customers or from each individual's own customers, own data?
So both, Roger. So their own data is just the customers that they touch, or their own internal data, depending on what type of customer it is. Is it a service provider or is it a requester, right? So, or if it's a service provider or a requester and they're trying to reduce their costs and they've got a national presence, they can then subscribe to our benchmarking data. And so they can look at anonymized data across the US and see, okay, in Denver for plumbing, on a job that takes 2 hours, I should typically pay this much.
Yep.
And they can slice and dice and pinpoint that data, you know, as big picture or as granular as they want.
Yep, which is a great one. Yeah.
And again, we've got 20 years of that data to pull from.
Are you providing reports? Are you providing information, or are they self-serving and getting the data and the metadata that they want out of the system?
All of the above.
Because when you're providing reports, you're more of a subscription service, right? Which I think is a solid business right now, to be sending out a regular interval of massaged data into the information, the KPIs they want, so they can direct their focus on areas of need very quickly without having to go back and self-serve. Because the problem is the self-serve, there's just so few people that will or can. You being able to shape the data for them, just like the Symetrics, Infometrics concepts, just like SkySpark, being able to shape data into something you can use, I think that's a push, and that becomes a subscription less and less of a SaaS.
Yeah, they can do all of it, Patrick. And we also have services that they can purchase to monitor all of that information. We call it MyFM.
Right.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep.
So Tracy, I know that your offering, your service offerings kind of mixes up, but kind of has all of these components that we're talking about.
It does. So we primarily deal in restaurant convenience store space, although it's kind of branched out beyond that. And when we first started, it was an energy management system and it was all CapEx. You just purchased the system. We went in, set it up. There was an on-premise user interface, and that was that. But evolved into a energy management as a service, where we now support either kind of a CapEx total or CapEx model with a combination of a SaaS to it, or a pure OpEx model with energy management as a service, where we go in and put our hardware onto your location. And then of course there's the service component where there's live data and reports and so forth associated with it. So some of the stuff Patrick was saying about, it becoming part of the building, if you will, the control system. We generally haven't had a problem with that, right? If somebody is going out of business and moving locations or whatever, we go in and pull out the control system and, restart them with their original thermostats or whatever they had in there before. So we kind of replace it back to a as it was state and do it that way.
And in a lot of other industries, especially finance and insurance and other sort of places, there's a concept that there's a lot of data that needs to flow from data gatherers or data creators to people that entities that use data, and there's often sort of a mechanism of brokering the data so they can be actually used. It can be you can maximize the use of data, and then the consumers of data can actually find the right kind of data to use. Is that a model that could work in this space?
Well, I have an interesting thought on that. One of the things that I've been saying ever since we started the company, it's one thing for our current clients to pay us for the service we're providing, whether it be alarms on equipment or energy savings or remote visibility and control. Everyone kind of values it, risk reduction and food temp monitoring. Those are kind of the value propositions for our current customer set. But from the beginning, I have thought that there would be more data to other third parties outside of our direct customer in terms of some of the information that we're collecting. We got data on tens of thousands of rooftop units by brand, which ones have the most problems, which one delivers the coldest air, which one runs the most or the least, normalized for temperature, however you want to slice and dice that kind of stuff. So maintenance equipment, we've got information data on how cold restaurants keep all their food and their walk-ins and all that kind of stuff. Some of it's a little, could be very dangerous. For instance, we had somebody ask us at one point in time if we'd be interested in publishing some kind of temperature information on something like a Yelp that could show how well a restaurant is doing in keeping their food temperatures down. And we thought that was a step too far. So that discussion didn't go very far. But you never know the value that some of this information is going to have to somebody else in the way they see the world. And I still think that ultimately we're going to find more value to maybe third parties outside, even anonymized data, outside of our direct customers.
So Tracy, have you ever approached some of the OEMs with your data, the rooftop manufacturers, the Tranes and Yorks and so on? No is the simple answer. Okay. Yeah, so we've kind of started, shopping around or having some discussions here and there, but nothing formal. Okay.
So Rick, how do you look at data and what you do? Is it like a vertical stack that's yours and you're not going to let anybody play with it?
I really look at it, instead of looking at data, I look at the services that is coming out of that. And like Tracy, we have lots of data on, what happens when someone's standing in front of a specific type or make or model of equipment. And, there's a lot of value to that. But how do we convert that to a service to make it more valuable and provide more efficiently? And these days, I would say that the key words out in the marketplace are our health, safety, and environment. And if we can help provide data that reduces risks in any of those areas, then there's a lot of value in that. So that's kind of, I don't really talk data very much. It's more services.
I'm wondering, Ken, you're listening to all of this.
I am. I'm wondering if the bigger picture is if we relabel this as outcome as a service, because if I come to either Tracy or Rick and I want to evaluate a particular unit, how reliable it is, or any of those things, I have an outcome in my mind, and I wish to come to you, and I would basically, you can give me a proposal. Here's my question. What data can you provide? And you say, I can provide this data. And then I say, how much for a report, and how much for it as real-time data on a monthly subscription fee. Does that make any sense?
Ken, it's great until somebody has to low bid it. Then the question, I'm dead serious. The question comes up is,
right.
how do you have that discussion with somebody, especially somebody that doesn't know as much about the field as you do? How do you have that discussion? And I think that would be a great thing for us to try to standardize.
I think when somebody comes to you with an outcome that they want, it would become pretty clear as to their understanding and the depth of why they came to you. I think the other thing is becoming intertwined, there's a good word, intertwined in all the things we're doing is trust. And I think a person that has an idea of what he is expecting as an outcome would go to a trusted provider, and based on, I may not lowball it based on if I trusted you more, or I thought your data, probably the big thing for me would, if I thought your data was better to give me the outcome I wished. But what you're seeing is if we kind of separate ourselves from technology, we might be able to work on this. Not sure.
We were basically working along that vein for the last 20 years, and we've taken it pretty far. But the downfall of the problem has been competitive bidding. John Petsy and I have had this conversation on panels before. The problem is that how do you competitively bid a professional service? If you're selling professional services, does a law firm, when you're a criminal lawyer, do you low bid your criminal lawyer? Do you low bid your neurosurgeon? Do you low bid any professional service? Does McKinsey and Company allow low bidding in their procurement? The answer is no. However, in our industry, whenever we get into a large enough institution or large enough scale, they want to treat it like that CapEx component. Because we're in the building side, all they can think about is, it's a CapEx, we've got to low bid it. You cannot low bid a professional service.
I agree.
That to me is the key that we've got to talk about.
Okay, I agree. And what we've done in the past is we've moved completely away from the bid and spec type market and moved into a request for proposal, because we are expecting a certain income outcome. And we basically try to write a mandatory requirements around that and have people bid into that type of, and typically the way you would buy a computer system or a network system for a building. I don't think you're going to do that on a low build or in a low bid situation.
So one of the benefits of having a stack, especially if you know the bottom is the sort of the physical stuff and the control stuff, is that you can draw a line there, right? And you can start to deal with things or sell it or actually talk about the stuff above the line differently to what's below the line. Maybe that's a start.
Well, I see that the stack pieces would be part of your request for proposal, or your request for outcome is that I'm wanting it at this level. The stack, I think, is quite useful. So
I think we got to go back to Jim's point, because we've experienced this too. And I think it's an inherent practice in our industry in particular. It's very fundamental, built into the industry, it seems, this search for commodity in everything that we do. So it would not be unusual for a buyer or even a relatively sophisticated customer to pit us. You know, we have competitors. We have to competitively bid stuff all the time, and they generally see, you know, our services as commodity, right? Energy management is energy management is energy management, and you know, multiple companies can come in and provide me that kind of a thing, for instance, or multiple companies can provide me temperature information on my food. So they find ways to, by the way, I agree with what you're saying, Ken, but they find ways to slice and dice and try to turn it into a commodity type situation, and therefore competitive bid. I don't mean to put words in your mouths, guys that are in this, but
you're right on, Craig.
Another approach that could help too, though, is to have pieces of the offering that can be maybe pushed out into the client's hands. So you know, maybe it's self-install of wireless equipment or whatever. And if you can kind of treat them as a working partner, then I think you can kind of maybe skirt them off into a different direction. I think the big thing that's happened in the last bunch of years is we were the control industry, and now we are the IT industry. So we have to start thinking and behaving like way the IT people think. And I think this
we've been behaving that way. The question is how do we get our 100-year-old customers and their systems to behave that way, Ken? The vendors have been very entrepreneurial in trying all form of models. What I don't see is any rate of change on the part of the customer base.
No, and it's you know, having said what I said, there's this ongoing dynamic that is always occurring, and you see it across lots of industries. So maybe we need to look outside of our industry to find somewhere where they've been successful, some vertical. You know, the search to try to commoditize is their job, right? If I'm a buyer at one of my customers, that's what I'm supposed to do, is try to find ways to competitively bid to, you know, drive the price down for the value that I'm receiving as much as possible. We don't like it on our side, but I mean, even something like gasoline, you know, there are convenience stores that price higher than others because they think, you know, you come in, we got better pumps, we give better information, we got a better store associated with it, whatever, you know, they try to de-commoditize their services. And this just is this continuous grind and ongoing battle all of the time. But to your point, Jim, I think a big piece that's missing is some more education for customers in our space to understand the difference here and what's going on with what we do now compared to what we did with 20 years ago even.
I think the other
maybe
we're coming up to the end of our hour. I think we can go on like this forever, but I think we've made promises that we're going to keep it to an hour. I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I think we're starting to really sort of get to the, you know, how do we deliver the value? What is the value, and how do we make it work? So I'll give one, go.
Okay, the only point I want to make is that we're in a time of change, and the reason that we're having this Zoom meeting, and we've never done this before. We've never all kind of put our heads together and tried to figure this out. Change is in the air. So now is the time. So I would recommend that anything you've tried in the past, pick it up, dust it off, and try it again.
I think that's a fantastic way of closing out this show.
End to end, E to E.
All right. Well, thanks to our guests, Patrick and Rick, and thanks to everybody else. And we'll be back next week with more of this riveting stuff. Bye-bye, all. Video will be up later tonight, and have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
See y'all. Nice talking to you. Bye.